Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Western New York Women's Foundation Pathways to Progress Speaker Series webinar on Innovating in Isolation. My name is Corey Fabian Barrett. I am the Director of External Affairs at the Western New York Women's Foundation, and I'm joined on the webinar this morning by today's speaker, Christy Francis, who's the co-founder of Fresh Batch Insights, as well as Mary Arathi, our Strategic Initiatives Coordinator, who will be helping us out behind the scenes and taking your questions. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to say a quick word about the Western New York Women's Foundation and the work that we've been doing lately. Our organization exists to support the women and girls of our community, and this is a mission which has become so much more critical in recent months and weeks. During these strange times, we've seen how a pandemic especially impacts and disrupts the lives of women in our communities and how it can have lasting implications for their lives going forward. NPR recently reported that women have suffered 55% of job losses caused by the pandemic nationally, largely because sectors with high female employment have been uniquely hit. On top of this, women are shouldering the burden of increased childcare and other caregiving responsibilities at home, as you can see from some of the numbers shown here. So this week, through our All In initiative, we released our best practice strategies for workplaces to support women who are returning to the office or the workforce after COVID-19. Women are a critical part of the workforce, and right now we have an opportunity to reimagine work and an economy that works for women. You can read more about these recommendations and download a printable flyer that you could share with your employer at WNYWomen'sFoundation.org. COVID-19 has only compounded and made more visible the stress and inequalities facing women every day. That's why we're actively continuing our work to advocate for women's economic empowerment, paid sick leave, and affordable, accessible childcare for all. So thank you all this morning for making time to join us on this webinar. We know your time is precious and we really appreciate your support of our work. We will continue creating these spaces for women to convene and learn in the coming weeks and months, so you should stay tuned for what we have upcoming, and feel free if there's something you're interested in or a topic you would like to hear about, please let us know. And now I have a few housekeeping notes about today's webinar. We'll be online talking with you all for about an hour today, with time for questions at the end of the formal presentation. This full session is also being recorded and will be freely available online afterwards if you want to watch it again or share it with a friend. In your sidebar, you will see that there is a chat box. We will be pausing for questions throughout the presentation and at the very end of the webinar. So if you have a question or you want to share an experience or an idea that you've had, please type it into the chat box at any time throughout. You'll see where you can select send a question to staff, and that will make sure that we see it. I'd now like to take a minute to introduce today's speaker. Christy Francis is the co-founder of Fresh Batch Insights, specializing in qualitative market research for organizations across a variety of industries. She helps clients build an ever-evolving narrative that sees consumers as a culture, not a collection of static data points. Her work is often the foundation for compelling marketing, branding, and product development. Christy is also an illustrator and a photographer. She owns and operates Avery and Harlow, an online art business named for her twin daughters, who I think we're going to see some of in the presentation today. Thank you for being with us, Christy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to hand over presenting power to you, and we can get started.
Perfect. All right. Corey, can you see my screen okay?
Yep, looks great. And there's one of your lovely daughters.
Yeah, there's one of my children. So thank you everybody for being here and spending some of your Friday morning with me. It is absolutely a pleasure for me to be able to come here and connect with all of you. Corey, and thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate it. Just to give everybody a little bit of background on kind of the inspiration behind this conversation. As Corey mentioned, I am a qualitative market researcher. So a lot of the time that I normally spend, working with different clients within generally kind of the marketing and product development realm. I'm often kind of building narratives that are based in really unfamiliar perspectives, right? So my job is to invite and record thoughts and experiences on specific topics, and usually to try and kind of foster creativity and innovation, usually for local, Buffalo area organizations. And given everything that we have gone through in recent months, my perspective on what innovation is and what it really means to be an innovator has completely changed. A year ago, if you asked me for my idea of what a list of really forward-thinking trailblazers and innovators might look like, I probably really would have given you kind of a who's who of the founders of startups, engineers, all of these people who are sort of constantly thinking about how they can reinvent everyday life. So I think most recently what I've noticed is that now that group really has begun to include teachers, fundraisers, people who are trying to navigate their nonprofit through the situation that we're facing, farmers, just really this growing list of very nimble professionals who have this endlessly resourceful mindset and are able to sort of sustain some level of normalcy and kind of bring us to a point where we're able to still function and connect the way that we need to. So my hope with this conversation and with this presentation is that everybody who is on the call, has at least one or two opportunities throughout this to kind of think about, well, how can I be bringing more of these sort of tips and practices into what I do so I can really foster innovation within my organization, within my life. How do I look at flexible thinking? How do I look at empathy, in terms of having conversations with customers or with clients and taking that and really building solutions that represent a variety of opinions and perspectives. So just to open this up, as Corey mentioned, this is one of my children here right on the front slide. And I think this has become a familiar scene in my household. We've got the fresh baked bread, which I think a lot of people were in their kitchens kind of trying to figure out what sorts of baked goods they could pull together with everything that was going on. And Vivian was just particularly proud of our bread that day. So just kind of a nice little intro picture here to start with a cameo from my daughter. As Corey mentioned, and as we've just talked about a bit here, I am a qualitative researcher. I have a little consultancy called Fresh Batch Insights. Also, I do a little bit of photography and illustration. To be honest with you, I spend a lot of time painting pet portraits, which is wonderful. It is an absolute pleasure to paint people's pets. And sort of the core of everything, I am also a mother of twins. So as I noted in here, if I sound a little bit tired or a little bit distracted, I probably have one or both of them running around while I'm trying to work, which I would assume is probably a familiar scene for many of you, probably a little bit relatable. So that's a little bit about me. Let's jump right in and start talking about why we're here today. So I loved this quote, this perspective on what innovation is and how it can be defined. The idea that really, innovation is about creating value, right? It is the process through which value is created and delivered to a community of users in the form of a new solution. And what I love about this definition is that it doesn't put any sort of restrictions in place around who you have to be to innovate. It's simply saying, go out there, think about what sort of value you can create, what you can deliver, understand your users, look at them as a community, which I particularly, enjoyed here, and think about how you can create new solutions. So I want you to keep this in mind as we're walking through the presentation today. We're going to look at examples of large companies, smaller organizations, nonprofits, some local organizations that really have done some great things. And I want everybody to kind of take away from that just how capable you are of, of creating value and coming up with new ideas. Okay, so let's start at sort of the base of all of this, which is thinking about how you can constantly be learning. Okay, so how do you approach research? How do you think about understanding which problems you want to be able to solve? So this is sort of this is my little short list of how I tend to sort of guide people when they're thinking about having conversations and in developing new ideas. Okay, so first of all, be a great listener. I think that my husband and a few of my friends know this about me, but every single year, my New Year's resolution, even before I started doing the work that I do now, was to be a better listener. I truly believe, that especially given everything that we've gone through recently, there's so much opportunity to stop and think about how you can listen to other people, questions you can be asking, things you can be observing, right? And understanding, to the second point here, what your own blind spots are. This is so important. And I think this is something that has always been at the core of research and a lot of what I've had the opportunity to do, but being aware that your experience is not representative of everybody's experience, right? So how important it is to seek those diverse research participants. Okay, think about how different people are experiencing the pandemic, right? From household to household, all these things that are kind of going on, that we don't necessarily have access to. There are so many stories, and I think more than ever, it's really important now to be collecting those stories and understanding those perspectives. Now, of course, whenever you're inviting any sort of idea or opinion from somebody, when you're having a conversation, it is so important to stay open-minded and accept that, even if you're not necessarily in agreement with a lot of what you're hearing, that person that you're talking to, that research participant, whoever it is in front of you or on the other side of the Zoom call, they're sharing their truth with you. They're being honest with you, right? They're being vulnerable, and they're trying to kind of give you a little bit of a snapshot of what it is to be in their shoes. So try your best to be respectful of that. The next thing that I always say is be a person, right? The great thing about qualitative research is that it is so focused on how people behave, on what their life looks like. It's data that really is collected to build out a narrative. So when you're out and you're talking to people and you're trying to come up with these new ideas, really focus on making sure your participants are comfortable enough that they feel like they can tell you the truth, right? That they feel like they can have an honest conversation with you, and you're going to be receptive of that. So once you kind of have gotten to the point where you're out, you're comfortable, you're having these conversations, keep in mind that really so much of innovation is rooted in this idea of solving a problem. All right, and that's not necessarily about what your capabilities are at this exact moment. So don't fixate too much on what you're able to do today. Really think about, what am I hearing? What am I observing, right? What are the things people are telling me that maybe they're having a hard time with? What am I seeing them have a hard time with? And what could I be doing as a result? All right, so this is really just a great way to kind of think about framing up any research that you do, any conversations that you have. All right, and then also remember, data is alive. Research is certainly not a one and done effort. It's about having these ongoing dynamic conversations. And I think one of the other questions that I seem to get a lot is, how exactly should I be framing up this research? What is it telling me? How do I make sure it's kind of a crystal ball into the future? And the answer is, it's not a crystal ball into the future, right? It's about understanding all the other things that are kind of going on within your organization, and you know, really the world as a whole, especially as we've seen recently, and understanding where those stories, where those narratives, where those pieces of data really fit within that context. And occasionally it is a little bit chaotic, because so is life, right? And research is really representative, qualitative research is representative of how human beings are actually out there living their lives. So I just wanted to put this right up front so that everybody could kind of get a sense of where a lot of this conversation and innovation is rooted. Okay, so we'll move on. This is a very interesting timeline, and I think I found this to be sort of a hopeful thing to take a look at, okay? But a lot of the brands that you might find particularly recognizable today actually started during recessions. So this idea, again, of solving a problem, thinking about new ways to do things, you know, I think a lot of times some of those needs and issues are highlighted during particularly challenging moments. Okay, so you've got, you know, some really familiar names here that were sort of born out of the early 80s. CNN, Electronic Arts. Everybody is probably familiar with MailChimp. I know that I have used MailChimp pretty much on a regular basis for my small business. So that was something that came out of that sort of dot-com recession when the tech bubble burst. And then in 2007 to 2009, a lot of the companies that we are very familiar with using now are really, you know, sort of started right around that era of the Great Recession. So Uber, Airbnb, Square, Groupon, Venmo. A really interesting comment that came from Corey when we took a look at this list was the idea that all of these businesses that you're seeing come out of the Great Recession are really rooted in this idea of creating some sort of value from a more shared economy. So I think, you know, kind of a cool thing to look at there, you know, Uber being able to kind of ride share, Airbnb, right? Having an alternative to staying at hotels, Groupon searching out discounts, Venmo being able to kind of easily share funds back and forth with friends. You know, maybe after you split the cost at a restaurant. Just really, when you look at that list, I think it's interesting to think about how much of that is kind of rooted in some of these things that you were seeing emerge as concerns at the time, and how inspired some of these startups were to start solving some of those problems. Okay, so just kind of an interesting thing to take a look at here. Now, this metaphor regarding chess is for my dad, who was very passionate about making sure that my family sort of understood how to approach the thought process involved in chess. But I like to say that innovation in moments like this, it's really a chess match, right? We're in a time of economic uncertainty. We have thoughts about how things may go. Okay, there's this push to have to focus on short-term flexibility so that you can keep your doors open. But there's also that question of, well, what happens afterwards, right? What do things look like long term? How do we make sure that we continue to make money, you know, and do what we need to do and solve problems when we're on the other side of this? So one article that I would encourage everybody to take a look at, I thought this was very interesting research. Now, this was published in the Harvard Business Review in 2010. So you'll see a lot of you know, sort of discussion up until that point in time around just sort of previous recessions and how companies fared within this point here in discussion. But this great article, Roaring Out of Recession, it was published by 3 researchers, and they really tried to take a look at which companies had successful strategies to navigate a recession. Okay, so how are they faring during kind of slow growth recovery, the years directly following, you know, a recession, and what did they continue to look like so over time? Okay, so they had 4,700 public companies across 3 global recessions. Again, remember, this was published in 2010, and I believe they wanted to look at the 3 years prior to the recession for each company and also the 3 years after. Okay, so you had again, the recession of the early 80s, early 90s, and then right around 2000, okay, where they were kind of trying to understand the behavior of the companies that they took a look at. So really, again, take a look at the article because I think the insights here, you know, I've summarized them, but there's some very interesting thoughts in here. So companies that really didn't do as well relative to each other tended to focus on avoiding losses. Okay, so immediately tried to figure out how to survive. That might mean losing people, having to significantly lower what their operating costs were. And then again, you know, touching back, of course, on the reason why we're here, that idea of innovation. They tended to not look at those R&D investments. So that idea of innovation was stunted, but beyond that, the quality of their existing products potentially kind of took a little bit of a hit. So that impacted not just, you know, the potential that they had for making money in the future, but also the perception of the product, you know, within the eyes of current customers. Okay. Then they took a look at promotion focused companies. All right, so these guys they're sort of on the other side of this. So this idea of really aggressively trying to invest, all right, focusing entirely on growth. And while that's ambitious, right, and while it's optimistic, this culture of optimism, as they referred to it within this article, really took a lot out of how important it was to focus on the gravity of the crisis. Okay, so it's wonderful to be forward looking, but you don't want to be so caught up in that you forget the things that you maybe need to be doing in the short term to make sure that you're taking care of your people and taking care of your company. All right. Then they also took a look at what they termed as these pragmatic companies. All right. And again, they were kind of blending those defensive and offensive moves. So in the short term, they understood that there had to be some level of cost cutting, but they also knew how to take that and turn it into investment in growth. All right, so at the end of all of this, more specifically, what these researchers found is that companies that tended to do really, really well coming out of a recession had that sort of ideal mix of defense and offense in terms of strategy. So they were looking at operational efficiency, okay? They were able to kind of maintain morale in the company by not necessarily reducing headcount, but looking at ways to control costs. And essentially, you know, after they came out of everything, not having to consider how expensive it would be to bring people back on. Okay, so they were kind of managing the costs of scaling up later on by being smart about how they were cutting costs to begin with. And you saw that they were investing in research and development, in marketing, in assets like plants and machinery. Now, a really nice example of this that they gave, you know, we'll talk about in a moment here is Target. Target actually did some really interesting things right around the sort of recession we had about a decade ago. So we'll talk about that. But again, this is one of my favorite quotes out of that article. Progressive companies stay closely connected to customer needs. All right, a powerful filter through which to make investment decisions. This comes back to everything that, you know, that we've kind of discussed so far. So that idea of rooting what you're doing in research, rooting it in conversation, and then making sure that you're continuing to focus on how to move ahead. Okay, so as I mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about Target here. Again, articles from 2010, so they didn't have, you know, the ability to kind of look back as we do in the year 2020 and kind of think about how Target has developed beyond this. All right, but during the 2007 and 2009 recession, Target was starting to notice that a lot of shoppers, a lot of customers, a lot of consumers, honestly, were very interested in this idea of needs versus wants, which of course makes sense, right, when you're trying to tighten the budget within a household. So companies like Walmart, and this is again more detailed in the article, were doing well with this, right? They were able to make sure that they were providing customer needs in a way that was very much in line with how customers sort of, you know, expected to receive value. All right, so what did Target decide to do? Well, they looked around and they said, okay, consumers are very interested in needs. All right, what can we do that really reflects that evolving consumer demand? And the answer was food. All right, they decided to really expand the grocery offering that they had in store. All right, so they not only sort of invested in those brands, but they even made sure that real estate in store was more dedicated to those sections, and that their food brands were marketed accordingly, okay, to reflect these changing consumer needs. So what did that ultimately mean for them? Well, again, by 2008, their two private label brands, Market Pantry and Archer Farms, had grown by 30% and 13%. All right. Now, if you look at Target over a decade later, I think it's clear that they kind of continue to iterate and try different things within that food and beverage space. I can tell you personally that my family does shop at Target a lot for groceries. You know, we find it to be kind of a nice, quick place to stop, and a lot of the different things that they're doing there are, you know, sort of resonating with our family, what's convenient for us, what we need. So I think you kind of continue to see that, again, even over a decade later, really being a choice that Target made that has continued to shape who they are, you know, within their space. Okay. So I think, you know, okay, Target, good example, very interesting to kind of see, you know, how they approach this, but you don't have to be Target, coming back to kind of our earlier conversation here, to do a really great job innovating. You don't have to be a huge brand. So I want to give you a couple examples of some of my favorite innovators within sort of a little bit of a smaller space recently, okay? If anybody is familiar with the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden, okay, they are very active on social media. They do have millions of followers on Facebook. They kind of rose to fame with the Fiona show, if anybody is familiar with the baby hippo that they had there in the past couple of years. She's certainly sort of grown her own fan following, okay, but when you kind of look at their offering in the early days of everybody needing to kind of go inside and spend a little bit more time at home, obviously, you could see that the Cincinnati Zoo recognized that there was that potential there, right, for in-person visits to the zoo to obviously be eliminated in the wake of COVID-19 and really hurt revenue. Okay. They also could see that parents were at home trying to find ways to, you know, to educate their children, to find entertaining activities virtually. I can say as a parent, I was so wonderfully, you know, relieved and delighted to kind of see all of these different options that were out there to give my kids some sort of glimpse into what was going on at their favorite zoos, at their favorite aquariums, at places that we normally love to visit. All right. So Cincinnati Zoo said, all right, you know, maybe we'll focus on offering these free daily activities and what they termed as virtual safaris. So when you watch this, and you can see a lot of them that are, I think, saved still to their Facebook feed or possibly, I think at this point on YouTube, you can see that they've basically got their staff going out there taking care of the animals, right? Because the animals continue to need care even while nobody is visiting. And they've created these really wonderful little videos for kids to continue to kind of learn and see that the world is still going on. There are still things out there, right? Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden is still taking care of its animals. And of course, that continues to kind of put them in a position where, you know, any sort of financial support that they receive, any sort of interest is really a positive thing, even if people can't be there physically, okay? Now, this is my absolute favorite example of sort of a really great innovative idea that that came up here in the past few months, okay? And I want to make a note about this. So this is also a wonderful example, if anybody is familiar with the book Contagious by Jonah Berger, okay? How creating this idea of inner remarkability, breaking the pattern that people expect, okay? This is a nice example of that too. So, all right, I will explain this to you. So Sweet Farm is an animal sanctuary, okay? And they had, obviously sort of a similar problem to what we just talked about with the zoo. But when COVID-19 really took all of our personal connection virtual and eliminated a lot of those in-person visits to the sanctuary, they were also concerned about their revenue. All right, so there is an interview with the sanctuary where they talk about how important they felt it was to really continue to bring smiles to people's faces, of course, while keeping the nonprofit relevant. All right, of course, while kind of focusing on the type of revenue that they needed to keep their doors open. So they created Goat to Meeting. All right, very clever little name. But essentially what happens with Goat to Meeting is you put in a request for your next family Zoom call, or even, I guess, work Zoom call. And you can have a llama or another sanctuary animal join the virtual meeting with you, okay? Now, when I first saw this, I thought that this, I believe the package started around $65 to do this. I thought, wow, what a clever idea. And this is exactly the sort of thing that I would do. I would certainly invite a llama to my meeting, okay? Now, what was really interesting was seeing just how significant this idea was in terms of its impact, okay? So, Sweet Farm looks around, they see a problem. Nobody is able to come to the sanctuary, but they still want to make sure that they are on people's minds. They also see people are connecting virtually, given that everything is, obviously sort of putting us in a place where we have to be able to do that. After a month of offering this, all right, so I believe this was just the March to April timeframe, they had about 300 requests, and some of those requests were international. Think about how tremendous that is, okay? And you can do some of the math on what the cost is to have a llama actually join your meeting, right? And think about the financial impact. But they were so nimble, they were so creative, and they really created something interesting. I mean, how many people expect to see a llama on their Zoom call, right? That turned into something great. So again, just a nice sort of example of innovative thinking and how creative it can be and how much of a difference it can make for a small company. Okay, so again, a nice Jonah Berger quote that I wanted to bring in here. Okay, so remarkable things provide social currency because they make the people who talk about them seem, well, more remarkable. And I love this quote after talking about the example with the animal sanctuary, because I mean, it's pretty cool to be able to have a llama on your call, or a goat, or whatever it is, right? People start talking about it. Their friends start wanting to invite people, onto their calls where maybe they try out this service. All right, so just sort of an interesting thing to consider as well within this topic of innovation and how to market some of these ideas. All right. I want to make sure that we take some time to also talk about people who are doing really incredible things within the Buffalo community. All right, there are so many local innovators. All right, we are surrounded by them. I've got two companies, specifically two organizations that I'm going to talk about, but I think beyond that, I can't tell you how many partners I work with, right, who have been so nimble and so flexible and so supportive of their staff throughout this, who have really found ways to make what we're going through workable. Okay, so I think that these are just a couple of examples in a sea of many examples. All right, so Produce Peddlers, if anybody is familiar with them, they are a very interesting example of a local company that looked around and noticed, farmers and suppliers who were selling product to restaurants, to schools, right? In the wake of all of those COVID-19 closures, the consumer relationships with local food systems suddenly changed. Okay, I maybe am not as comfortable going to the grocery store to get my food. Certainly, we weren't really going to restaurants. There were a lot of different things that vendors and suppliers were struggling with in the wake of all of this, and Produce Peddlers saw that. Okay, so what they did is they took this this B2B platform that they had that focused on food waste and supporting local food systems, and opened that up to the consumer. So again, they're meeting a lot of those sort of original ideas that they had for the platform, while also nimbly, incredibly nimbly sort of changing the whole structure of what they're doing. So through that online platform, consumers were able to go in, order fresh produce, and receive touchless delivery within 2 or 3 days. Your groceries are on your front doorstep, straight from farmers that are right in the local area. So really kind of great example of how a lot of that quick thinking and sort of innovative approach helped them expand what they were doing and serve the community. Another one, Massachusetts Ave Project. So I sit on the board for MAP, and one of the major hurdles that they had to overcome was really trying to figure out how to have their spring seedling sale. Okay, so what did they learn? Well, obviously safety precautions kind of upended the traditional model for something like this. Normally you go into the farm, you pick up your seedlings, right? You pay for your seedlings, you have a conversation with the nice people at MAP, right? And then you take them home and you plant your seedlings in your garden. Well, this totally changed the face of that, right? So what problem did they need to solve? Well, they needed some flexibility, all right, particularly in order and delivery options to be able to support the Buffalo community. So very, very quickly, Aaron and Danielle over at MAP were able to create this online seedling ordering platform and touchless pickup. All right, now I will tell you, I ordered my seedlings from them this year, and it was a pretty seamless process. The interesting thing about this was that by offering that online option, there were actually more sales in the first 2 hours of online ordering than in the full 2 weeks of the previous year's seedling sale. All right, so you can see right away that there was sort of this immediate impact and success out of that effort. All right, so with all of these examples and sort of all of the things that we considered so far, what does that mean for you? What can you do within your own organization? All right. The first thing that I recommend is you do your research. It's very hard to know what your product, what your brand means to someone until you ask. Okay, and it's important to also remember needs are always changing. This brings us back kind of to the beginning of this presentation. Don't stop planning for the future, especially when things are difficult. It's important that you go out there, that you talk to real people, that you set up conversations with real people, and that you listen to them. All right, think about not just how to have a conversation, but how to watch what they're doing. Go onto social media, look at how people are reacting to things, listen to what they're saying. Okay, we live in a world where, for all the challenges of being so connected, there's also such a tremendous opportunity in the ability to kind of look at that incredible amount of information that's available online and hear what people are saying and connect very quickly with people who are all over the world. Okay, so think about again, how to be a really great listener, and then focus on all of that information, putting that into really dynamic, flexible documents. All right, so capture what you learn, continue to learn, and think about how documents like personas, all right, which is one of my favorites, can really help you think like your customer. There's a lot of great information out there on how to put together a persona, so I would encourage you to do a little bit of research, but essentially it really helps you think about your client, your customer, your consumer is an actual person, what their motivations look like, what their goals look like, all of this very human-focused research that you've been doing. It makes a lot of sense to kind of store it in a format like that where you can continue to look at at people as people. Okay, so another great quote that I wanted to kind of close out with here: the only way you survive is you continuously transform into something else. And it's this idea of continuous transformation that makes you an innovation company. I absolutely I love this quote, because I think similar to the quote that we started with, it's not about being a big company or a small company, right? It's not about it's not about kind of putting rules around what it means to change and to think about really new, interesting ideas. It's that focus on transformation. And I think that's something that we all need to take away from this. So if you have any questions that you have not thought of during the presentation, please feel free to reach out to me. Here is my contact information. You can also take a look at my website, which has my contact information on it too. And I am always happy, to kind of offer any thoughts, anything that, I can help anyone think through, I'm here. So, also just kind of a quick little list of resources that I have available, and Corey, I can talk to you about kind of how to get these links out there too if people want to take a look at them. But thank you all so much for being here today, and I guess I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
Yes, so we do have a few questions. The first one is, how would you recommend dipping your toe into market research? How do you start these conversations to make sure they're going to be helpful for your idea or organization and inspire innovation?
Okay, that's an awesome question, and a very well written question too. I like that. So, I think that it's all about just starting to have a conversation. You don't have to have sort of this perfect lineup of people who you need to talk to. It's sort of just getting started, right? So maybe you have a customer who is particularly vocal, right? Somebody who really has a lot of new ideas to share. You could just give them a call. You could start talking to them. A lot of times, when I have a question, maybe I've put it into a survey format, I'll share that survey on social media. I'll email it around, right? I'll do what I can to kind of create this very, I tend to use the term grassroots effort to support some of those research efforts. I think what you'll find, because research as a term is, I think, a little bit tough. I think, there's something just intimidating about the idea of research as a term. It's really, on the qualitative side, about just starting those conversations and offering to listen to people. And then you can kind of determine, what format makes the most sense for you. Also, again, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier in the presentation, you want to make sure when you're having those conversations, when you're kind of just checking in with people and seeing what their thoughts are, that you're not asking them leading questions, that you're really keeping things very open-ended and very neutral, so that you're able to get the most honest answers. And I think you'll learn over time and become more comfortable, and really, start to see what tremendous value there is and how much people just want to be listened to and want to be heard. There's a lot there. So I hope that answers that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is, how does a small company keep these big ideas going when the world goes back to normal and we have to do business as usual?
Oh boy. Wow, that's another great question. I think that you really have to make it core to who you are as a company. I think that there has to be a real sort of level of dedication and commitment that's highly visible throughout the company to this idea of research and maintaining these conversations and connecting with consumers and clients and the people that you want to hear from. It's hard to kind of give an answer on that. In terms of, specifically what that might look like within a given company. But, maybe that means you have somebody there who is in charge of conducting this research or is in charge of going out in the field and spending time with consumers. The people who are really managing the company show that they have a clear commitment to research. It's kind of built into your regular development process. I do think, again, I understand the idea that once you kind of get out of a particularly turbulent time and things start to go back to normal, it can be hard to sort of maintain that vision. But I think that at a point where, you know, you've really got the opportunity to come in and make that a priority and have everybody understand the importance of it, that's the time when you start thinking about establishing those things so that they're kind of in place as you move forward. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Yes, we do have another question. So how do you stay motivated while you keep moving forward while innovating?
Well, you know, I think that's different for every person, and probably different for every company. You know, I think, so I was actually teaching during the start of this pandemic. It was my first time ever teaching at a college level. And for me, you know, personally, the ideas that these students had and the way that they, you know, the way that they experienced the world, it was so different from kind of my own experiences and my own perspective. And for me, you know, just spending time talking to them, even of course when learning went virtual, reading, you know, about their ideas and some of the things that they were experiencing, that was tremendously motivational for me. You know, so I think in a lot of ways, kind of making sure that you're always putting yourself in positions where you can connect with other people and learn from their experiences and kind of learn from how they see the world. My brain is always kind of spinning too. It's always going, you know, every time I'm out, I might be shopping, I might be, you know, at a restaurant. Sometimes, you know, I'll sit and I'll just kind of watch and observe, and I'll always kind of try and keep myself in this mindset where I'm thinking about problems that need to be solved. And I think that helps keep me focused on innovation. You know, those are all maybe more personal things. Within a company, again, you know, I think that really comes back to just making sure that there is a clear connection back to its importance, and that, you know, kind of collectively, everybody always feels like the idea of innovation is rewarded, and things that come from it are celebrated, right? And that it's a very positive thing. So it's all attitude, and I think also, you know, again, making sure that you're constantly looking around and kind of thinking about how things are changing and how innovation, you know, the steps that organizations take or that you take personally can really reflect and also kind of respect that change.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that is actually the completion of our questions. I'm sure there's still a lot of thoughts to think about because that was a very informative presentation. I will let Corey take over, and if there's anything else that either of you would like to say, I will step off.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much.
And thank everybody for those wonderful questions. If you want to snatch a few in there, we do have a few more minutes, but while you're thinking about that, I just wanted to thank Christy again. This is a very inspiring session. You gave us some really great examples of how others are using this time to be creative, and also a lot of food for thought for all of us on how we can start thinking in those ways when we're working on maybe new projects or trying to invigorate things we're doing in our offices. So thank you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Appreciate it.
Oh, good. And thanks to everybody on the webinar today who joined us. We hope that you found it helpful. You can follow the Western New York Women's Foundation on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn to get all the latest updates on the work that we're doing. You can see here's a little snippet of some posts we've had recently of some tips for your life. Our next webinar in this series will be in July. It's on Friday, July 17th, also at 9 a.m. We will be joined by Western New York Women's Foundation board member and financial advisor, Marianne Colson. She's going to be leading a panel of experts from Morgan Stanley and discussing what saving can look like for women who are juggling multiple priorities and goals. There's more information about this session, and registration will soon be open on our website, which is wnywomensfoundation.org. So again, thank you to Christy and to Mary for all her help and for moderating our wonderful questions. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you can all be safe and be well.